Hey guys, Omerko here, self-taught web developer. For today, we will create a course app using just Ionic framework. This whole tutorial will serve us as a crash course about the Ionic, so you could see how could you simply use the Ionic on its own. Also, this crash course about the Ionic will be divided into two videos. First video, this one today, will be the layout of this whole app with Ionic, and the second video will be functionality for the app with JavaScript. For you who don't know, Ionic is a framework that is used to create native and web apps. It can and it is mostly used with Angular and React, but it can also be used just on its own. As you can see here in the heading, it has just one code base that could be used through different technologies like Angular, React, or on its own. So once you learn its code base, it won't be the problem to use it in multiple technologies. If I go here into developers and here UI components, then you can see that it has its own components for web and mobile apps. It uses web components to create those, and it's compiling those with a tool called Stencil. Here we can see components that is offered to us, like this action sheet, alert, badge, card, button. If I click here on buttons, it will open up the buttons. On the right side you can see how it looks on iOS and how it looks on Android. And there is obviously whole explanation for the buttons with different properties, usages, etc. Here on the platform you have this capacitor link. It will lead you to the capacitor official website, and this capacitor is also the tool that is used in Ionic. This is their tool. This capacitor is basically a runtime for apps, so they could be used on iOS and Android devices, but also on a web in the same time. Let's now see the app that we will create today. Here you can see my app, how it looks on a web view. But I could inspect my element and go into this device toolbar, click on it, and here you can see how my app will look on a pixel tool. Here from this drop down I could choose iPhone X, refresh the page, and my app will have a different UI obviously, as iOS and Android doesn't have the same code base for the UI. For today we will create the UI itself, and the next week we will create the functionality. So functionality will be, for example, I could add here HTML and CSS for beginners course, right? The price could be $39.99, add course, and you can see that down below the course is inside of the list, and the overall expense of our all courses is $39.99, as we don't have a multiple one. Let me add one more, CSS animations course, for example. This is also $39.99, add course, there it is. And let's add one more, JavaScript for beginners, $49.99, add course, there it is. So this is what we will create today, just the UI for this. There will be a toolbar, then the card from Ionic, input fields, buttons, and this list and overall expense here. I just saw that I also mistyped expense here, so sorry for that. So now that you know what we will create today, let's jump into our code and work with it. So we will start with the empty project here. So let's create index.html file first. So index.html file, this will serve us as the main file for our app. So I will just add the HTML5 code here, like this. Title could be course, Ionic course app, like this. And as we will also work with functionality, but not in this video, I will create app.js so I could have it here. The app.js will be empty file for now, and I will just import it here at the bottom of my body. So script tag app.js, that's it. For Ionic itself, we don't need to install anything. We could just add imports from CDN. So I will go to the page of the Ionic for this. On this page, we could find the imports that we need. So this will be these three imports here. But if I scroll down, you could see that we could have the setup with Angular and also React, right? So there is also the Ionic icons, so we could use the icons on their own. But what we need for this tutorial is these three imports here. These three imports are all that we need for simple HTML and JavaScript app. So I will copy first this CSS part, link here, and in my head here, I will copy it like this. Then I will copy my two scripts from Ionic, and just down below above my app.js, I will import that like this. Let me also add some comment, Ionic, and also here Ionic, so I could know. So by this we successfully added Ionic into our project, and now we could use it. But first things first, we should wrap our content, all content that we would have on our screen, with the Ionic element. This Ionic element will tell Ionic basically that the entire HTML that is inside of that content is used to create the app. So this element is called Ion app, like this. So whatever we use inside will be at the end wrapped into the app itself. So I could just save this and we are fine to continue with our code. So I set up first my screen differently, so I zoomed a bit my Visual Studio Code so you could see the code clearer, and on the right side we will have immediately preview of our app. So first thing that we will have in our app is that toolbar, that header at the top. I will just add some spacing here, and let me add the comment of header, toolbar, navigation bar, as you wish basically, and I will use Ionic element here called Ion header. This Ion header will basically create the header part for our app. So I will add here the end comment, end of header, and inside we could create our header. If I would refresh the screen right now, there will be nothing on a screen, as we still don't have any content inside. To create the toolbar on its own, I need to create Ionic toolbar like this, and if I refresh the screen right now, you can see this white kinda toolbar at the top with the box shadow on it. Next to that, I could pass Ionic title like this, and I will just add the title to be course app. Save and refresh. There it is. So we kinda have just simple white toolbar with dark text inside. We can easily change that without using any custom CSS. If I come here to our Ionic website and here developers, then UI components, it will lead me to this docs/components part, and I could scroll down to find the toolbar. 1 second. Media menu, pop over, select tabs, toggle. Yeah, here it is, Ionic toolbar. If I click on this, it will show me the Ionic toolbar component on its own. You can see that it supports buttons, borders, etc. But also, if I scroll down a bit, you can see these properties, and one of the properties is called color. So I could add the property attribute of color to my toolbar and pass some of the values to get the different color for my toolbar. So by that, if I come here to my toolbar and add the color attribute like this and set it equal to a primary, save it and refresh the page, you can see that my color of the toolbar now is blue. So Ionic doesn't just come with these already created components, but it also comes with these already finished attributes that are connected to our CSS or JavaScript, depending on which one we are using. And I used here a primary color, and the blue is a primary color for Ionic default theme. So next thing that I wish to create for my app is the form or input fields and buttons for adding my course name and price. So after Ionic header here, I could add something called Ionic content. So let me add a content comment, and I will add the Ionic content like this. Inside of this content, I could add something called Ionic grid, which will create the grid for me. This grid is similar as other frameworks that we have with HTML and CSS, like Bootstrap or Zurb Foundation. It has 12 columns, so you could easily work with it. Usually grids have rows inside, so I will create the Ionic row like this. So this row will serve me to create that form, those input fields for creating the course. So I will add above a comment here, adding course, like this. Let me add some more spacing. Let me also add the end comment here, end of adding course. And I could work with columns inside of my row. So to work with columns, I could just add, sorry, not Ionic, but Ionic col, like this, to create the column on its own. As Ionic has its own grid, I could work with attributes for its own grid. So for example, I could pass here size, MD for medium, and set it to be 6. And also I could pass offset for medium to be 3. So what does this mean? As Ionic has its own grid with 12 columns, basically this this column will be moved 3 columns from the left side, and it will take up 6 columns on larger devices like laptops and desktop devices, and by that it will be just in center, as it will have 3 columns of empty space on the left and 3 columns of empty space on the right side, and it will just take up 6 columns on the bigger devices. But on a smaller devices that are less than this medium size, so for SM size, small size, or XS, so extra small size, like tablets and smartphones, it will take full 12 columns. So now that I have my grid ready, I will create Ionic card, Ionic component, and I could pass a couple of things to that also. So in my column, I could create Ionic, again, I did the same thing, Ionic card like this, and card will basically create the card on its own. But I won't pass the content to this card. I will create one more component inside. This one will be called Ionic card content. And this Ionic card content will serve us to render our content on its own. So if I wish to add just some type of content section, whatever, in Ionic we usually use Ionic item. So I will create Ionic item, and this Ionic item, to that I could pass this input field that I wish. But I could first pass Ionic label. So the label on its own will be for this Ionic input. And I don't need to pass that for attribute to connect it to my input field. Basically I will keep my input and label in same item, and they will be together connected already. For the label, I will add a course name to serve me as a label, and I will pass these attributes to it. It's called position, and I will set it to be floating. So once we click on that input field, the label will from the input field be floated to the top side basically. And then I could create my Ionic input here, Ionic input like this, and to that I could put the type to be text, as I need text here, and I will also add the ID of course name. By this ID we will later target this input field in our JavaScript. So now I could grab my item fully like this and just copy it one more, as we will have not just the course name but course price. Input is okay, the type won't be the text but the number here, and course name ID will be changed to course price ID like this. So now if I would refresh my page, you will see my card here with the course name. If I click on it, you see that the label is moved to the top, it's floated to the top basically, and course price, you see this increment and decrement here for the number itself, so I could type just numbers here, not the letters. But we still need down below to have our buttons to clear the data from these input fields, and also to add the course on its own. So after this Ionic item, I will just add the div like this, and the div could have a class on it. So class, I will use Ionic classes here, so Ionic text, and this class will move my buttons to the right side, like kinda float it to the right side, and Ionic margin top, and this class will add a bit margin at the top of my buttons itself. So by this you can see that Ionic is not just attributes and components, it has its own classes. And as we imported this CSS from Ionic here, the classes will work just fine. So to create the button, you saw that Ionic has its own button. So I could create Ionic button like this, and I could pass some attributes to it. I will first pass the color of my button to be danger, as this first button will be kinda a red button to clear the data from my input fields, so danger is okay. Then fill will be the type of styling for the button, and I will set it to be outline, so kinda just to have the text and the border visible, and the background will be kinda transparent. And I will also add the ID for my button to be VTN clear, for example, as I will also target it later in my JavaScript. So I could, for my button, put some content here. I will add the icon, so we could work a bit also with the icons with Ionic and the text. So Ionic icon, it's that simple to add. I don't need to pass anything inside of this open and close tag for this icon on its own, but I could add the attribute called name, and the name I could pass, for example, close outline. This close outline is the name of the Ionic icons, and it will show, for example, the icon that will look kind of cross, like an X sign. And I will also pass clear text here. Save and refresh, and you see that there is the button with the border and the text visible, as we have this fill outline. The color is obviously red, as it is danger, and we have here also the icon, close icon kinda, and clear text, so I could click on it. It has cool animation from Ionic, everything looks nice. So I need one more button, but this one will be for adding the course, so I will copy my Ionic button here and just paste it down below. So color won't be danger now, but success, like this. Fill, I will just remove fill from here fully. ID won't be button clear, but button add, like this. Ionic icon won't be close outline, it will be add outline, it's a plus sign. And clear text will be add course text, like this, course. Sorry, yeah. So if I refresh the page, there it is, right? So now that we have this card, I wanted to show you the grid, how it works on its own. So you see that my content is kinda in the middle of my screen, and I didn't display it to be in the middle of my screen. It's because it's inside of the row, inside of the column. And this column, if you remember, has the offset set to 3 on bigger screens. So basically 3 first columns will be empty. Then it has the content set on bigger screens to 6, so it will take up 6 columns like this. And as it has 12 columns, 3 plus 6 is 9, so it will have 3 columns empty on a side, so that's why it looks like it's in the middle of my screen. But on the smaller devices, if I inspect my element, on the iPhone, doesn't have proper design here. If I refresh the page, you will see that on the iPhone, it it will take up the full screen with the card, and the UI will look different. And I already mentioned this. iOS and Android doesn't have the same kind of UI, and that's why the Ionic on its own worked with the different UIs, so the apps that we could create for the iOS and Ionic still have the different UI but the same code base. This looks obviously great on an iPhone on its own. If I move to Pixel 2 and refresh the page, also look good on the Android device. But now that we have this card for creating our courses, for adding our courses, I could create my list to render my courses. So for my list, I don't need to add one more Ionic content that I added here, like Ionic content. No, Ionic content will basically wrap my entire content of my screen, as header is wrapping my header part of my app, right? I also don't need to pass Ionic grid here, as I already have that, so I could just create one more row here. So I will add Ionic row, and as I didn't pass anything to my row here, I won't add anything to my row here. So I will first add the comments, for example, list of courses here, and I will add end comment here, end of list of courses, as we are creating list. So as you know, row you should have the column, so I will add the Ionic column here, and the column on its own will have basically the same UI as same grid system as one above, right? So I will just copy it from one above, and here it is. So I wish to have my Ionic list here. So to add the list, it's just easy. I could just pass Ionic list, not li, but list full word. So this list could have a couple of attributes, but I won't add any. I will just add class from Ionic margin and also I will pass the ID. It's a course list, like this. So why would we have the Ionic margin on the end? This basically means that we will have the margin on the right side. Well, basically list on its own will be kinda moved a bit from the left side, so on the right side it will look like it's not in the line with our card. So if I add the margin on the right side and move it, it will be moved kinda inside, so it will still take the same spacing as my card above. So to add the course on its own, I could just add Ionic item here. As you remember, we use the item to render whatever we wish. And I will add here HTML and CSS for beginners, like this, put 2 dots, and then I will add span here. Or I don't need this span here, I could just pass here price for $39.99, like this. So if I refresh my screen, you will see that my price is here, right? But I will add a dollar at the end, so it looks kinda that's in a dollar currency. Let me add 2 more. So Ionic item, like this. This one will be JavaScript for beginners, which will be $49.99. And I will add 1 more Ionic item here, CSS animations, which will be $39.99. Great, save and refresh. Here it is. So on my screen now, we can obviously see after my card we have a list of courses, all kinda bought courses kinda, but these are for now just static here. But later, when we add functionality, those will be dynamically added there. We are just left to create overall expenses here. So I will just add 1 more row below my list of courses. So I will add first the comment of overall expenses, and I could add the Ionic row, like this, and inside I could have Ionic column, like this. So I will first add the end comment here, end of overall expenses, and I could copy my sizes for the column, just paste it here, so it will be the same. So the overall expenses section will just have the paragraph with some text and the overall amount of money basically that we have from our courses. So I will add the paragraph, and I will add the class on it to Ionic margin start to move it a bit again to the inside, and the text will be overall expense and 2 dots, and here I will add a span. This span will have the ID of overall expense, and let's just add $1, $2, $3 here for the example. So the reason that this span has the ID, basically I will grab this later in my JavaScript, and once I calculate the overall from my courses, I will render that number in that span here. So now we are fully created the layout for an app using Ionic components. You saw how easy was this to create, I hope. So we have this app on a web. I could take a look at it on a Pixel 2, for example, looks great. Obviously, it is fully responsive, and on an iPhone X, if I refresh my screen, it will have a different UI, but it's still fully responsive, and it also looks great. So close, refresh. Great. Now that we are done with the layout for our Ionic app, in my next video we will work on functionality of this app, and we will use our app.js file to do all of those. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that you like it. If you did, please click like and subscribe, and see you in the next one.